If you're listening to this podcast, it's probably because a child you love and care for is differently wired. Are they also struggling in their current educational setting, seen only for what they're doing wrong while longing for positive relationships with peers and others? Envision a world where your child's unique abilities are not just recognized, but celebrated. A world where they can connect with others and their true potential is seen and appreciated. The Strength-Based Assessment Lab's mission is to build a world for your child just like that. Through its innovative approach, it aims to empower students, families, educators, and professionals to create positive, effective, and collaborative learning experiences. Be a part of shaping a brighter future for your child. Visit www.bgs.edu to learn more about what a strength-based assessment could mean for your family. That's bgs.edu.
And so when we let go of control of what they already are, then we can begin to help them be who they are. But we can't let go of that unless we let go of our own attachment to what their experience is and what they're experiencing every day and who they become and what their path is in life.
Welcome to the Tilt Parenting Podcast, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and today's episode explores the idea of emotional intelligence, which, according to Psychology Today, is the ability to identify and manage your own emotions and the emotions of others. To talk about this, I'm bringing on Amy Steindler, a certified life coach and emotional intelligence trainer who's recently begun working with parents raising uniquely wired kids and introducing them to the idea of using emotional intelligence as a way to help them honor their child's path. She does this through her program, Perfectly Flawed Parenting. If you're a brain science nerd like me, you will love our conversation, which goes into the idea of how our emotions are data and information that, when recognized and explored, can actually serve us and support us in being better parents. Amy also shares with us a ton of resources, books, experts, websites. I think the show notes page for this episode is longer than any previous podcast, so if you're someone who likes to dive deep, this episode is for you. As always, thanks for listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about Tilt, visit www.tiltparenting.com. Hey everyone, it's Debbie Reber here with the Tilt Parenting Podcast, and today I am really happy to welcome to the show Amy Steindler. Hey Amy.
Hi Debbie, it's such a pleasure and an honor to be here.
And just a little background for listeners, Amy is a life coach and an emotional intelligence coach who, I took this from your website, considers herself a collaborator, a co-conspirator, counselor, and cheerleader for her clients' best lives. And Amy works with many different kinds of clients. And incidentally, Amy and I have known each other for many years now because we did a life coach program training together back in 2011. But what prompted me to bring her on the podcast today was that recently Amy led a workshop for parents who have children with very high IQs, but who are struggling with some aspect of emotional intelligence. And after seeing the kinds of things Amy shared with this community of parents, I just thought it would be really useful insight for parents in the Tilt community. So with that, I think probably a good place to start today is just if you could explain to us or define what exactly emotional intelligence is.
So there are so many great definitions and models of emotional intelligence, from Daniel Goleman, who was one of the first researchers to use the term emotional intelligence, and he also uses the term social intelligence, to the emotional intelligence assessment that I use, which was created by a researcher named Reuven Bar-On, which looks at emotional intelligence in terms of 15 specific skills, which is a great way to look at it. And then there's Travis Bradbury, who does emotional intelligence 2.0, which you see in every single airport bookstore. But for me, I have my own way of thinking about it after reading about it and working with it for a while. And my thought is that first you need to know something about emotions. You're going to need emotional literacy before you get to emotional intelligence. Like you need to be able to read before you can get a PhD in something. And the thing you need to know about emotions, first and foremost, is that they are data. Emotions are data. They are information. And I find that this really helps left brain directed thinkers, the logical lefties, I like to call them, accept that information. If emotions are data, then they can accept it as information as opposed to something that takes them off track. It's what really puts them on track when it comes to how they want to behave and how they want to make decisions. So when I think about emotional intelligence, then it's the ability to gather, interpret, analyze, and act on that data. First, you have to know what you're feeling, when you're feeling it, what triggered it, and how the emotional energy of your response affects everyone around you. So one of the ways of understanding emotion and getting it under control is to find a name for it. And I found that the parents relate to this because they don't necessarily have a full vocabulary of emotional terms. They've got mad, sad, glad, but under mad there could be frustrated, there could be fearful, there could be furious. There are so many nuances of emotion. And the broader your emotional vocabulary, the greater the opportunity you have to name it and tame it and get more information from it.
I do remember when Asher was younger, and I think one of the first times that we took him to see, I guess she was a therapist. This is when he was maybe 4. We all went as a family because his anger was the big emotion. But she gave us kind of a worksheet that we had up on our refrigerator that named a ton of emotions so we could start just expanding the vocabulary. So I guess that's the same idea, but it's a great point that the more nuanced you can get in the way you identify an emotion, the more you can understand that and how it impacts you.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You're looking for information here. Emotions are data, right? So what is that information? So I mentioned gathering the information. Gathering it means turning to your body, and from your experience that emotions are felt in the body, right? We don't think our emotions, we feel them. Where do we feel things? In our body. So gathering that information means having a familiarity with the way your body responds to emotion or expresses emotion. And spending a little time there, feeling those feelings fully so you can, move on to the next bit of interpreting it is really important. So one of the things, and maybe you can talk about how you do this with Asher, how do you sit with the feeling physically and describe it so that you know what it is next time it comes up? It's easier to identify.
Well, as you're talking about this, it's this very same therapist that we worked with. We came up with a character together called the Mad Monster. I think there was actually, even before the Mad Monster, there was another name for him, but we had to kind of externalize it a little bit. It's a really hard concept for young kids. I mean, it's hard enough for adults, I think, to start to really understand and recognize when this stuff is happening and what it feels like, especially if you're trying to catch it before something bubbles into a bigger emotion. But I think it's really hard for younger kids to make that connection with their body. But that's one way that we did it. We kind of created this, it was almost an alter ego that took over his body, that we would say, oh, looks like the Mad Monster is shown up again. And what is the Mad Monster feeling? And that was a way that he was able to kind of reflect on that. And then there's, as kids get older, that, there's the talk of how is your engine running, right? Is your engine running fast? Is it running too slow? So there's different strategies, but it's a really, I think, a complicated and complex skill for kids to learn to really be able to identify what that feels like.
I agree. And I think, we as parents have to model that in a way. A couple things came up for me as you were talking. One is the metaphor, right? The metaphor of the mad monster or the engine running. Metaphors are very personal. And if we know our own personal metaphors for what we're feeling and what we're going through, we can help our kids find their own. Because, maybe it's a child who doesn't relate to mechanics of an engine, but might relate to something else. So I love that we're talking about metaphors, because that's another one of my favorite things. And just to keep this conversation about parenting, how do you gather the data? How do you drop into your body and understand what you're feeling before your own feelings ratchet up and affect those around you, right? Step one here of emotional intelligence is really understanding what an emotion feels like in your body. And to your point, it takes some practice. The second piece of this is interpreting that data, which takes things up a notch, translating your body's physical language into something your logical mind, your prefrontal cortex, can appreciate so that it can support you in understanding what you're feeling. What's this emotion telling me? Here's what I'm feeling. What's it telling me? And then to analyze it and dig a little bit deeper about what that emotion is telling you and what it's like. And that's a good place to sort of come up with a metaphor for helping you understand it. And then acting on it. What do I do with that information? How do I use it to make my life better and to make the life of my child better? And that's a place most of us find meaning, which is something that I think is very important.
We've had Margaret Webb, who I believe you know, on the show a couple of times, and we have talked a lot about this kind of in the moment, because I think, as you're talking, it's making me reflect on times where I've had, kind of those more intense emotional responses to things that are happening, right? I get triggered because of something that is either not going the way I thought it was going to go, or maybe Asher has a big reaction that he takes out on me. So suddenly I'm dealing with that. So we've talked a lot about in that moment of just recognizing that, stepping aside and taking a couple of deep breaths and also honoring that emotional response. So I love that we're taking this now a step further in the conversation, because I think so many of us feel not ashamed, but we feel like we shouldn't be having that strong emotional reaction to something, that if we were a better parent, we'd be able to have it under control, or we feel bad about blowing up or whatever it is. And so, there is that first step of even acknowledging and becoming comfortable with like, okay, this is my emotional response and it's not a bad thing. And like you said, it's information. So now this is a way to deepen that connection so that you can create meaning out of that.
Exactly. And I think, part of what I talked about with the parents in that talk that I gave recently, was becoming a coach to your children, and really what I do and what you as a parent, I see doing from what I'm reading and from your podcast is holding or creating or helping clear a space. And it's a specific kind of space. It's the space between stimulus and response, right? That Viktor Frankl quote from Man's Search for Meaning. He says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And I think that encapsulates everything you need to know about emotional intelligence right there. But the trick is, how do we expand that space? What do we do with that space? What do we do in that space? How do we hold that space for our children? How do we just pause in the middle of a circumstance that troubles us and allow ourselves to do the next thing that we do as guides and coaches, which is to help people create opportunities or see options for themselves? So I like to stress the importance of knowing that there are options and teaching each other about what our options are, even when we think we don't have any. I use an exercise called have to versus choose to, where you write down everything you think you have to do and you change I have to I choose to because, so that you know that everything's a choice. And once you're conscious of your motivation for making that choice, it becomes less of a burden. For example, someone says, well, I have to make dinner for my children. I have to feed my children. Well, you don't. You choose to because you want them to be healthy and well-nourished. You choose to because you don't want to go to jail for child endangerment. But these are choices you're making. So we can go down to the most elemental have to and see it as a choice and see where that opens up some thinking.
I really love that, because I think so many parents raising differently wired kids feel so trapped and stuck, because often it seems like there really are very few options, whether it's with schooling or many circumstances in their lives. We already feel often as if we have fewer options, right? Our options are limited because we have these extra considerations with many decisions that we make as parents. And it can be really easy to get stuck in that place of feeling like we only have this one way to go. And for me personally and in our family, we threw things on their head in a major way by making the life change we made. And I know that that's not reasonable for most people to do what we did, but it it was a kind of a big example of how everything really is up for debate. Everything is up for questioning, and there is choice in everything. So I really love that perspective, and what a great exercise, the have to versus choose to. That little reframe can really have a big impact.
I agree. You took something that seemed like, there weren't a lot of choices, and you turned it into an opportunity. So the last piece, what we do as guides and coaches, and what your listeners can do for themselves first, right? Always for yourself first. Put your own oxygen mask on first. You've got to model these things. But the piece that is so important is helping your children and helping yourself connect to the sense of meaning and purpose that everyone needs, right? In Maslow's hierarchy, it's part of the self-actualization piece, really realizing our individual potential, and the self-transcendence piece that he added later, which is, more social responsibility, more about a goal, something altruistic, something bigger than themselves. And Lord knows we need a lot more of that in this world right now. So, one of my gifts is I tend to see people's potential better than they can, which is not surprising. And I reflect it back to them in a way that they can believe in it too. And again, that's something that you practice with yourself when you practice with your child. So you're creating space, you're guiding, you're looking for opportunities or options, and you're connecting everything you do to something that's meaningful to you.
Can you give us an example as that relates to a parent maybe that you've worked with, or a situation that listeners could relate to?
So maybe we can use you as an example. I'm thinking about how you worked through with Asher the tantrum piece, and sort of getting through the meltdown phase, which I know is not over altogether, but has really changed. Was there a way that you helped open up opportunities for him to choose differently? And, was there a way that you connected to something with greater purpose? Because I remember him saying, I realized I didn't want to tear up my work anymore. Mm-hmm. There was something meaningful in that for him.
Darren and I are prepping for a big move at the moment, so we are fully leaning into any and everything that simplifies things, and that absolutely includes mealtimes. At a time when my executive functioning skills are being pushed to the limit, even planning and executing dinner for our family these days can feel like a really big lift. That's why I'm especially grateful for Green Chef, a meal service that offers pre-measured and prepped ingredients to my door. Each box is packed with foods you can feel good about, like whole fruits and vegetables, plus lean protein and whole grain options. In fact, one of the things I love most about Green Chef is that they offer options that prioritize gut and brain health, with science-backed recipes that feature ingredients like fiber, antioxidants, and omega-3 fatty acids. During this time of lots of stress, it feels really grounding to know we're supporting ourselves nutritionally. I will take all the support I can get. And Green Chef doesn't just cover dinner recipes. I can add high-quality breakfasts, lunches, and snacks to my weekly box from Green Market. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Green Chef, the #1 meal kit for eating well. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Symbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Symbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon. And that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Symbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. I think the things that have helped the most or made the biggest difference there are three things that are coming up for me. One is that I stopped making it about me. That was a biggie when I reminded myself, oh, this is nothing to do with me. This only has to do with Asher not having the skills he needs to be able to handle this situation or respond in a more appropriate way. So as soon as I made it less personal for me, then I started responding in a different way. And then I was able to be empathetic. And when I can be empathetic in those situations and really kind of lean in instead of, retreating or wanting him to retreat, that also shifted things, because the moment that he feels heard or understood, that tends to de-escalate what's going on. And then I think the third thing, when you were just mentioning how he realized he didn't want to destroy his work, and that's something I shared in a podcast about frustration, that he used to just destroy his work when he was really frustrated and then feel bad about that. I think for him, it's been helping him not feel ashamed of those big reactions, because he tends to, and now he's almost he's going to be 12 this summer. So he's moving into some different territory in terms of his hormones and emotions and that preteen thing going on. So I'm very cognizant of that shame piece and wanting to help him recognize that there's no such thing as a bad emotion, that shame is really a waste. Well, I don't know if it's a waste of emotion, but shame, we don't need to go to a shame place, that we can be gentle with ourselves, that we can choose to not judge ourselves, and we can just be kind and move on. So that's what we've done here.
Well, and that is perfect, because it, also opens you up to be able to see the opportunities and the options. Because if you are reacting and making it about you, it's a lot harder to open up and respond to what's actually present, as opposed to what the voices in your head are telling you. That sort of leads us sort of nicely to the piece that I sent you about Perfectly Flawed Parenting, which, by the way, we're going to offer to all of your listeners.
Awesome.
Which is about, thinking about parenting in terms of perfection, control, and judgment, right? Letting go of those three things, which first requires knowing that we're doing it, right? Mm-hmm. We're being a perfectionist. We're trying to control things or our children or their reactions. And then that piece that you just mentioned about judging ourselves and judging them. So, this perfection piece, or the way that we want to be really great, perfect parents, and that stands in our way when we're setting the bar higher and higher all the time. We never reach it, which gives the critical voice in our heads a full-time job, right? Gives them something to talk about. So, as we're trying to be a better parent than ours were, or trying to measure up to someone else's expectations, or even worse, your idea of what their expectations are, or comparing yourself to someone else's experience of parenting, or again, your idea of what their parenting is, really sets us up.
When we first discussed you coming onto the podcast and you sent me this information, the Perfectly Flawed Parenting handout, I loved it. And it so resonated with me, especially the perfection, the control, the judgment pieces. And I think it's so spot on for what so many parents, I think parents everywhere, but especially parents raising kids who are some way moving through the world differently. So we have this kind of added pressure, added eyes on us. It's just a different experience. And that perfection piece, and I'd love you to kind of talk about each of these in more detail if you can. But I mean, all of these were huge for me. They had me so stuck and so kind of in my head, just a complete mess, because I was just focused so much on, I'm not doing a good job. It's not the way it's supposed to be. People are thinking I'm failing as a parent. People are judging. Like, it was so many voices in my head. And that more than anything Asher could have done, that was what was setting me up for disaster.
Well, it's so funny. What's coming up for me as you're saying that is, how many parents have ever thought, oh, if someone would just give me the manual, I will follow the rules, right? Just tell me what to do. And the irony is, of course, that, you're always inventing it as you go along. You're creating the process of parenting as you do it. It's happening on the fly. So, getting it perfect, what's the measurement? How do you define that? Books, lots of great books have been written on perfectionism and shame, and I love Brene Brown for this. So I recommend all your listeners take a look at The Gifts of Imperfection and Daring Greatly, if they haven't, to learn how to speak about your shame so you can take away its power. I think you've done this beautifully, Deborah. I really do. And what comes up about perfectionism, and again, the way that you've done this, is that you've replaced perfectionism with authenticity. You've found a way to speak the truth about your experience. You have found people you can trust to talk about these feelings, talk about your feelings of failure, which, again, feelings are information that you can use to change the way you respond. And that's exactly what I've seen you doing.
So it is about being open and sharing then. I mean, would you say that that's one of the keys, is finding a way to speak your truth?
Well, it certainly helped me quiet my biggest neurosis, right? I was a straight A student, man. I got to get it right. I got to get it right. I got to get it right. And, that feeling of needing to get it right stood in my way. It killed my curiosity. It kept me from experiencing the moment, which you mentioned earlier, right? What are we missing by wishing things were different? We're missing what's actually happening. And what's actually happening is the truth of our human experience. It's got everything in there. It's got joy, it's got sorrow, it's got pain, it's got happiness, it's got everything. And as much as we'd like to only have the joy and happiness piece, it just isn't going to happen that way. I said something to a client recently who kept talking about all these obstacles that were coming up for her. And I said, well, I hate to break it to you, but the obstacles never stop coming. So how do you want to see them? What do you want to do with them?
Yeah, and Asher's always saying, if the bad things didn't happen or the obstacles didn't happen, we wouldn't enjoy or appreciate the great things. He's always able to reframe that, and he helps me reframe that as well, that it is part of a full human experience, is having those highs and lows and being present for all of it.
And I think it's so, so important to have connection, right? You've got to feel connection with people who get you. And you're creating, and one of the wonderful things about tilt parenting, and I'm not getting paid to say this, folks, one of the most wonderful things about it is they're creating a community where people can be comfortable being who they are. They can be comfortable being imperfect. They can be comfortable feeling their shame and expressing it. They can be comfortable wishing they could blame someone else for all their problems and then realizing, oh, well, I guess I can't, so maybe I'll spend my energy elsewhere. So, good on you for creating this place.
Yes, and I did not pay Amy to say that. Thank you for saying that.
You're welcome.
So letting go of perfection. So we talked about perfection. Is there anything else in that piece before we move on to control that is kind of something that parents who are perfectionists, and many of our kids are as well, so that our kids don't fall far from the tree, ways that parents can kind of model imperfection for our kids, so it's not only helping us, but helping the whole family?
Yeah, I think the process of learning emotional intelligence and learning how to deal with what you're feeling and how to see it as data and how to interpret that data, sharing that with your kids and saying, look, I'm learning as I go too.
Mm-hmm.
I've never stopped learning. And as much as I would love to get it perfect every time, dang it, it's just not happening that way. So I think modeling the process and having a vocabulary for the process. And that's one of the things that the emotional intelligence models that I work with give you. They give you a vocabulary and a framework to discuss your experience. What are we experiencing today? What's it like for us today? And that's one of my favorite questions, by the way. Instead of saying, how are you? What's it like for you today? What are you experiencing today? Which gets you into a much deeper conversation.
That's a nice dinner table question to bring up. We used to say, and we don't do this anymore, we have dinner together almost every night, and we do talk about a lot of things. Right now it tends to be politics. But we used to say what went well for you today and what was hard for you today. But Can you restate your that question one more time? I really like the way you worded that.
What's it like for you?
Yeah, I like that. What's it like for you today?
Or what are you experiencing? And, speaking of politics, I mean, we're all experiencing some very strong emotions around the political climate in Europe and in America. And, I think talking about what emotions it's bringing up is just as important as talking about the political issues themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What am I feeling? How am I feeling about control, right? This brings up the next piece after perfection, which is control and what we're trying to control. And with our kids, I think, and I got to do a full disclosure here. I am not a parent. I am the sort of second set of parents that kids come to because I'm not invested in their outcome. I'm not invested in having them turn out a certain way. So I just want to fully disclose that I am not a parent. And so I'm not coaching kids. I'm coaching parents, people, adults. So on the control piece, what are we trying to control? Are we trying to keep our kids from getting hurt or disappointed? Or worse, are we asking them to fulfill our own expectations for our lives or their lives without realizing it? And I think when you realized and said, "Oh my God, it's not about me," you broke that chain right there, right? You were no longer, asking Asher to behave in a way that was better for you. I have a really unlikely source of parenting advice, and that's from Gloria Steinem, one of the mothers of the feminist movement, who said something along the lines of, our children are not ours, really. Our job is to help them become what they already are.
I love that.
And so when we let go of control of what they already are, then we can begin to help them be who they are. But we can't let go of that unless we let go of our own attachment to what their experience is and what they're experiencing every day and who they become and what their path is in life.
I think control, too, again, is such a big piece for many parents, but parents of differently wired kids, perhaps especially so, because there are so many things that feel out of our control that it can be very disconcerting, especially when we realize this path is not going to look the same way as a quote unquote typical path, though we're not just going to necessarily be able to go to preschool and move on to the public school and do this and just kind of nicely progress and have all those typical rites of passage. So there is a lot of feeling of out of control, and perhaps we even try to find control then in different ways. And you talking about this has also brought to mind Alfie Kohn. Are you familiar with Alfie Kohn?
No, but I'm writing it down. Tell me.
He's written a number of books, but his kind of signature book is called Unconditional Parenting. And it is that very idea that there's so many pieces of a child's life that we as parents want to control, whether it's how they sit at the table or what, kind of every little choice. And after I read his book, and he's really saying, let's question, what do you really need to be controlling here? And how is that benefiting your child? After I read his book, it made me start noticing just the little things that I was trying to control, whether, again, it was like how Asher used his utensil or how he poured water, me being concerned about it spilling, or, there's so many things that we as parents are wanting to control. And when you start setting yourself free from that and letting your child, like, as you said, you think of yourself as a guide. If you think of yourself as their parent, as a guide, and your job is to kind of guide them and support them rather than control them, that changes things immensely too, not just for the parent, but the child responds really well when they feel like you're not micromanaging their every move.
Yeah, I love that. And a lot of this is very much in the purview of sort of Byron Katie, what are we believing that's causing us pain? Are we believing that if he doesn't hold his utensil right, he will fail as a human being? I mean, what is it that we could possibly be believing that's causing us pain? And where's the should? He should do this differently. I should be a better parent. All of those shoulds come up in the control piece. So this is a great place to become very self-aware, as you said, of what we're really thinking about our circumstances and our children's circumstances and what they're doing in the moment. Because our reaction to those circumstances, how we pour water, how we hold the utensil, I love that example. This is how we're teaching our children how to be in the world.
Oh, it's all connected, isn't it?
It is all connected. And, for me, it comes down to one thing: self-awareness, 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 self-awareness. And coming back to that, because we lose sight of it so easily. And until I become the Buddha, I'm going to continue to practice that. How do I come back to an awareness of what I'm feeling and what that information is telling me so that I can respond creatively in this moment? You've heard Martha Beck say we in our best lives live in perpetual creative response to whatever is present, not to whatever story we're making up in our head, and not to the critical voice that tells us how wrong or bad we are, but to what's actually here. It gives us a moment to do some reality testing, right? That takes us back to the space between whatever's happening and our response. That's where we can dwell. That's where we can gain more self-awareness. So practicing, expanding that space, exploring, taking a breath, whatever it is that you have to do to dwell there more often.
Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.
It is for me, and I'm sure it is for many parents listening. One of my biggest goals for Asher is to help him become more self-aware. That is what we spend a lot of time talking about, because the more, these aren't things that he is naturally really good at. The social emotional stuff is tougher for him. So again, that putting on the oxygen mask first is a great metaphor, but we have to start with ourselves, and then by us doing it is not only modeling this for our kids, but it shifts things and can change the whole dynamic.
Absolutely. And once you teach it to them, kids have a very finely tuned BS meter. And if you do as I say, not as I do, you will get busted. So it'll keep you humble.
Definitely. Could you talk for just a few minutes about the judgment, the third piece of your 3-step approach, what the judgment piece is?
Yeah, this is a good one, right? So your inner critic, my inner critic, gets so used to being the first one you consult that she doesn't even wait to be asked for her opinion anymore. She is in the driver's seat, right? So my critical voice is on it. And there's a wonderful book called The Art of Possibilities by Roz and Ben Zander. And they've got an exercise called giving yourself an A and permission to stretch and try different things and fail again and again. So what he did was he noticed that his music students, he's the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic, and he teaches music. And he noticed that his students were not taking chances. They were so restricting their creativity and therefore their ability because they weren't trying new things and practicing new things. And he decided to give everyone an A in the course on day one, and then ask them all to write him a letter saying what they did, like in the past tense, what they did to deserve that A. And so they all wrote him this letter about, what they tried and how they did it and what was new. And he said it was amazing the change in their process. So throughout the course, he noticed them trying new things, venturing out of their comfort zone, failing and trying again. So what if we did that for ourselves as parents or as human beings? What if you gave yourself an A as a parent right now and allowed yourself to try new things, see what works, fail and try again, and still get an A?
I love that. I want to read the book. I love that story about the music teacher. And that is something I've never heard before. That idea of just taking the pressure off, giving yourself an A, and then seeing what happens.
Yeah, and you could do that. You could write yourself the letter about why you deserve that A, in the past tense, and say, well, I deserved this A because and let yourself think about that. So, all of these exercises are in the Perfectly Flawed Parenting handout that we're going to offer to your listeners so they can play with it. See where it takes you. See if it gives you some relief from whatever might be causing you to believe that you don't have options or that you're not a good parent.
Right. And it also, one of the things you have in your handout is the word curiosity jumped out at me. And that is one of my favorite words in the world. And I think that applies in this case as well. So if you give yourself that A up front and then you kind of make that list of the things that you're trying, you can approach it with curiosity instead of judgment and noticing like, this is interesting. When I did this, I felt this way, or I wonder what will happen if I try this. And that feels like it could be a game changer for a lot of people.
I love that. And it actually was a game changer for me. I realized that in my quest to get it right and to be the A student and to be the smart coach, right? Be the smartest person in the room, it killed my curiosity. And I don't think those two things can exist side by side, the need to be right and the need to get it right and the need to be perfect, and that sense of wonder and curiosity. I think one kills the other. And without our sense of curiosity, I don't know. I think we'd be missing a lot of what our lives are all about.
It'd be really boring.
I think so.
Yeah. So, okay. This is a lot. My mind is kind of spinning right now. So you've mentioned so many great resources. First of all, books. And I just want to let listeners know that I will, on the show notes, include links to all of the books that Amy mentioned. I know I'm going to be checking out some of them myself. And Amy, where can people find you? And are there any other kind of resources that you want to share before we say goodbye?
Sure. Well, they can find me at insightOutlife.com, INSIGHTOUTLIFE, insightOutlife.com. And there's a contact form there. If you contact me, I will email you the Perfectly Flawed Parenting handout, and there's no obligation. You don't have to join my mailing list or anything like that. I also want to mention just a resource on emotional intelligence that I discovered somehow, and maybe you even sent it to me, Debbie, 6seconds.org. It's the number 6seconds.org. It's a lot of content on emotional intelligence, and they've got a specific area just for parenting.
Oh, cool. No, I have not heard of that before.
Oh, it's so interesting. I spend a fair amount of time poking around there. And one that you introduced me to, heysigmund.com. Karen Young, I think, is a brilliant writer. You'll see me guest blogging there soon. Love what she does, and I'd love to hear you do a podcast with her because I think she's phenomenal.
Yes, I agree. Fantastic content. I share a lot of her information on the Tilt Parenting Facebook page. Really great insights.
Yeah, and then the last piece, are you familiar with Brain Pickings?
I am. I haven't been on that site in a while, but yeah, do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah, I mean, she curates all the most interesting books on creativity and art and thought leadership and being a human being, basically. If you're interested in deeper, really fascinating perspectives on all aspects of the deeply examined life, that is a wonderful place to go and let your mind wander and make new connections that you'll be able to use in your parenting and in your life.
I love that you mentioned that resource because it's also just a reminder that so much of us being successful or fulfilled parents and supporting our kids is by keeping ourselves filled up emotionally, creatively, energetically. So thanks for sharing that resource too. I think so much that's out there for parents is about the kids and what they need and books on how to help the kid. So this really feels very nurturing to support the parents. And I love that.
Well, it's about inspiration, right? We crave inspiration. You never know where it's going to come from. So the more of these kinds of things you can check out, the more inspiration you will have. You know, it'll be a strange connection perhaps, but it will shake something loose for you that you weren't thinking about. That's the way the brain works. We should do another podcast on how the brain works.
All right, I'm making a note of that. I know, obviously, we could be talking for a while. I'm feeling like we should wrap this one up because I try to keep these podcasts to a reasonable length for our busy parents. So I think we will definitely have to do a part 2 here.
Well, what a delight and a pleasure. And I love the work that you're doing. It's so important. And to all of you parents out there who are struggling, Debbie's been through it. And I just love watching that process for both of you. And I'm an Asher voyeur. I'm watching him grow up, and it's phenomenal.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy. And thank you for being on the show and sharing all of this really useful insight for parents. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Tilt Parenting podcast. To learn more about Amy Steindler and emotional intelligence and get the links to all of the resources mentioned in today's show, visit the show notes for this episode at tiltparenting.com/session26. Also, as Amy mentioned, she's making the 15-page handout from her awesome Perfectly Flawed Parenting program available to listeners. The handout is packed with information and includes a bunch of exercises to help you explore and apply emotional intelligence as it relates to you and your parenting style. To get that handout, visit Amy's website at insightOutlife.com/contact and send her a note saying you'd like a copy of the handout. Again, I'll include a link to that on the show notes page. And before I go, a quick request. We're on a mission to build our listenership for the Tilt Parenting podcast. If you want to help us, here are 2 things you can do. First, leave an honest review on iTunes. This helps the show gain more visibility in the iTunes universe. And second, share your favorite episode in your social media world, your Facebook page, parenting groups you hang out in online, and more. We want to make sure the parents who'd benefit from these conversations know that we're out there. Thanks for helping us spread the word. And thanks again for listening. For more information on Tilt Parenting, visit www.tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.